It's now time for Season 3 of the Boomtown Pod, your home for all combat sports. Breaking down everything from the UFC, Bellator, and PFL, all the way to boxing. This is your home for everything combat. Join your hosts, Andrew Kahn and Cole Smith, as they break down all the latest news, signings, and fight cards so you never miss a beat. This podcast sponsored by RKP Roofing in Regina. For all your roofing requirements, reach out to Randall and the crew for the ultimate roof and home experience. 306-580-9849. This podcast sponsored by FKN Beer, the funniest beer out there without a doubt. Delicious FKN Ale, and now the brand new Boom Lagers in store now. Grab yours off the shelf today and enjoy the best Canadian beer. Sandman Boxing System and Blue Collar Media Group, partners and sponsors since day one. Now, here's your hosts, Andrew Kahn and Cole Smith. Season 3 is live now.
There we are. I'm riding solo today. Cole's taking the night off. But hey, thanks for tuning into the Boomtown Pod podcast, your home for all things combat sports. Of course, I am your host, Andrew. You can find me at the Boomtown Pod on all things social media. And we've got a special guest today. But before I introduce them, of course, we've got to give out some love to our sponsors, because without them, I couldn't do this. So, of course, FKN Ale, most recently our newest sponsor this year, providing nothing but delicious beverages like FKN Boom and FKN Ale. It is delightful. It is tasty. It's crisp. It's refreshing. I'm having one now after a long day. It's soothing. Also very good that way. Also give much love to Elliot and Randall and the crew over at RKP Roofing. They have been amazing with us so far. For all your home needs, make sure to reach out to them. Of course, Sandman Boxing System and Blue Collar Media Group are people since day one. And Rest When Dead Clothing Apparel. Last week, I messed up significantly. It's actually Rest When Dead apparel.ca, not .com. So shout out to Aaron, the homie. We did some commercials and advertising with him last week. You can check that actually out on our YouTube page. We're so happy to have them on as well. Now, of course, this first segment is kind of like a breakdown, if you will. It is the week that was, and it's sponsored by FKN Ale and FKN Boom Lager, and it is the UFC 282. I'm going to call it the odd card, because there's so many things that were odd about this card. And of course, helping me break that down today, you see him on the screen. He is that gorgeous man over there. That's our special guest, CBS's very own Shakiel Mahjouri, off of SHAK MMA. Also, you can check that out. How you doing, brother?
Good. Very gorgeous neck beard angle you get me at here. Sorry, I got a flat. I couldn't make it to the studio today, so we're doing this at home and hoping everything goes smoothly.
People want to make fun of the neck beards, bro, but that's all I can grow. I'm unfortunately in the 80% type, if you will, of neck beards.
Maybe maybe in our 40s, 50s, we might finally start getting a little bit in around the face, but you work with what you got. What can you do?
I'm gonna start thriving at 40. I feel like that's my whole narrative now. Just turned 30, so why not, right?
Yes, sir.
I referred to it, man. UFC 282. She was the odd card. We had 10 finishes. We almost set a record in the UFC for most finishes on a pay-per-view card, which would have been nuts. And then we got two absolute snoozers. We'll go into it. But anyways, kicking off the card was an incredible event. When I saw that this was going to be kicking off 282, I thought, damn, that's a hell of a matchup we're making. Exactly. Mamma mia, that is a fantastic matchup. Bryce Mitchell, Thug Nasty, taking on Ilia Topuria, who is one of the nastiest dudes in that division. Obviously, we saw how it played out. Bryce Mitchell getting outclassed and outworked in every aspect of the fight game when it came down to it. Now, today he announced that he had the flu going into this, and I do believe it to an extent, but every fighter that loses will always have that crutch. Like, yeah, I was hurt during camp. Yeah, I had a flu. Yeah. Do you believe it?
Sure, he probably did have the flu, but here's the reality, right? They always say it in advance of the fight and after the fact. No fighter goes in there 100%. And we know, lately it's been the cause of a lot of controversy. Obviously, the whole insider betting scandal with James Krause and the UFC. ESPN's Mark Raimondi did a fantastic piece where he had an anonymous coach say, he was in the room where all of the corners from one team, either the red or the blue corner, their fighters were getting ready, and he looked over, he noticed the guy was injured, so he pulled up his phone and put some money down on the other guy, right? TJ Dillashaw goes in there in no condition to compete against Aljamain Sterling. But the reality is, I at least in my opinion, one of the reasons fighters don't say that they're hurt and disclose this information ahead of time, is because you would basically get no UFC fights ever. I mean, people will be falling out left, right, and center, right? If you went in there and you said, I got this problem, that problem. It's not like the NFL where there's players on reserve to take over. You'd have no cards. It just wouldn't work. So did he have the flu? Maybe, probably even. Was he ever competitive in that fight? Not really. Like, his kicks had no sting. If it was a cardio issue, okay, but that's not really how the fight played out. He was losing almost from the word go.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing too. I mean, and we all know it, especially because you and I cover it quite frequently. Bryce Mitchell does bring it, and he's usually a bring it fighter. He's a people's fighter, man. He's a redneck who lives in a trailer, and he that's him, man. He comes at you, and like you said during the weigh-ins, you know, God fears no man. Like, and he's just sitting there saying it, and everybody's like, "What the hell is he okay?" Like, but that's who Bryce Mitchell is, and he just brings it, man. And honestly, I agree with you. His kicks were lackluster. Topuria didn't look like he was really worried about his punching at all. And Bryce's takedown sometimes when he gets on the ground, man, his jiu-jitsu is next level. So it's just like we saw the weakest version of Bryce Mitchell against probably his strongest opponent to date. And I mean, Ilia Topuria is no slouch in this division.
So that's the thing, you know, even going into the fight, I said candidly, like, I love the optics of this fight. You have two dudes in the top 15 who are very much ready to take that next step up and fight, you know, the top 5. They're both undefeated. Bryce Mitchell has been a tremendous submission artist in the UFC. Ilia Topuria going into that fight with 3 KOs and 4 fights, including a knockout of Ryan Hall, who was that sort of jigsaw puzzle of jiu-jitsu to solve in the UFC. But this is what I was saying in advance of the fight is I honestly don't know where Bryce Mitchell is going to win this fight because Ilia Topuria has dynamite in his hands. We saw in the Jai Herbert fight that he's got heart. He will take a bad beating and come back and put it on you even worse, right? He's got a chip on his shoulder, dude. Like, the guy has something to prove, and you can tell he can be in a bad mood sometimes, and that's exactly the kind of person who succeeds in MMA. And here's the thing that I think a lot of people forgot or weren't conscious of. Sure, he might have mostly been known for his knockouts in the UFC, but there's a reason he was able to get into that space with Ryan Hall to deliver that strike is because he's a really good grappler. In fact, his first 7 pro MMA fights, all via submission. So I'm going into this fight, and I'm like, people are really, I know Joe Rogan was like, we didn't think he'd be this good at grappling with Bryce Mitchell. Why not? He was the only guy willing to go down to the ground with Ryan Hall, and he was able to get himself in positions very quickly that avoided danger and put him in position to win the fight. That doesn't just happen accidentally. That's a guy who's very conscious about the threats that the other person presents.
Yeah, I agree with you fully. I mean, a lot of people didn't. I don't think a lot of people in this gave Ilia Topuria the shot that he deserved or the recognition that he deserved, especially at the press conference when you're like, you know, we had the whole Patty and Topuria thing. And now, honestly, after watching the event, oh my goodness, I don't know. Patty I don't think it's a matchup he wants, boy. He doesn't want that smoke. I'll tell you that. You keep that chin out, boy, Ilia Topuria will knock it off. But we'll get into that later. But I think Topuria finally got the respect from an international standpoint of just how good he is. And he was talking a lot of trash the weigh-ins and at the ceremonies, but he backed all of it up.
And that's, you know, credit to the UFC. That is the sort of fight you put as a main card opener. If you want to take, sometimes I complain about the way the positions UFC puts certain fighters in. Like, I'll say to the day I die, I got a lot of flack for asking if Mateusz Gamrot versus Arman Tsarukyan was among the worst main events in UFC history. But here's the thing. It's people took such big offense to it. First of all, I was trying to stir things a little bit. I just wanted the conversation. But 2, the issue is not Mateusz or Arman. It's you're taking 2 guys who the North American casual audience isn't super familiar with. If this was a card headlining a fight night in like Poland, totally different story. But you've got 2 guys at the Apex who are really, really good, but you're not going to give them much of a lead in, right? Like, if you took those 2 guys, moved them over a week to a pay-per-view, that was some of the most exciting wrestling I've seen in the UFC in a long freaking time. And how much more would those guys have benefited had they been on under a title fight or 2? And then when Mateusz wins and fights Beneil, now Beneil gets even more credit for beating Gamrot. So that's the thing. Bryce Mitchell, Ilia Topuria is the kind of fight that should be on a main card pay-per-view, because now you're building these guys up. The UFC used to have title fights for their fight night events,
That's
right?
true.
So it's not such an absurd concept to take guys who you're super familiar with, put them on a main event, and then flood underneath it a bunch of people who can now start headlining fight nights and drawing an audience for themselves.
And you and I are very big on social media. We obviously saw the Bryce Mitchell people like, oh, he's never going to come back from this and all this other stuff. Like, just time out. Bryce Mitchell's just fine. He will be a great fighter. You know what Bryce Mitchell reminds me of? And I've been saying this to people since day one of him coming out. He reminds me so much of Nate Diaz. And the only reason why is because Nate was the ultimate hype train. He's that guy that people love to follow. Was he really, really good? Yeah, he was a good fighter. He wasn't great. He never got that title, right? He never got that shot. But we tuned in because he was that guy. And I think Bryce Mitchell is that guy for the UFC, where people will watch him. They like him. He's likable. He's just a people's fighter. Who doesn't want to watch a guy who lives in a 2-story motorhome, like in the middle of nowhere, have fun fighting, right? Like, would you say that's a pretty decent comparison?
I'm trying to think. To a degree, yes. I do think there's sort of this one thing Bryce Mitchell has kind of going. I would say against him in terms of fanfare, but not in terms of popularity. Is one, some of his political leanings, conspiracy theories. They actually probably encourage and incentivize a portion of the MMA fan base. But for the ones who don't like it, at least they might tune in to see him lose. I don't think there's, in terms of marketability, so long as you're drawing a reaction, people are going to tune in for that. The other thing I would say that the Diaz brothers really had going for him that Bryce doesn't quite is this sort of anti-establishment aura that you love. Like, you always, dude, was there anything more cathartic or satisfying than Nate Diaz being set up for failure against Hamza Chimaev? Just take the dog to the farm. And then because of this BS, Chimaev misses weight, and Nate Diaz is like, no, I'm not fighting him. You're going to have to give people refunds. And he gets the fight he wanted from the beginning, Tony Ferguson. Like, whether or not you like the UFC, you can't help but root when the establishment is against the employee. That's why Stone Cold Steve Austin, Vince McMahon worked. That's why Nate Diaz, Bryce Mitchell work. Or sorry, Nate Diaz, Dana White works. I don't know that Bryce Mitchell is going to be quite that, but he's a very important. Like, it doesn't look at Henry Cejudo, right? It doesn't take much for people to latch on to personalities in MMA, because, no offense, most of the fighters don't show their personalities. They're either dry or they don't try to be. In this business, the fruit is so low. As long as I can grab onto something to either like or dislike about you, you've got a bright future in the UFC. And Bryce Mitchell is very outspoken. He's very much himself, to your point. He's an everyday man, farmer, that sort of vibe. And there's 100%, especially in MMA, there's 100% a market for something like that.
I mean, he's also got the nickname Thug Nasty and has a rap career. So, I mean, there's lots of things going for Bryce.
You know what? By the metric of like UFC rappers, he's actually pretty good. Yeah. I'm not gonna go listen to the music beyond giving it like a shot.
Bryce Mitchell wins, right?
Yeah.
But going into the second fight of the night, of course, we had Santiago P., who wasn't supposed to take on Alex Morono. That was not the matchup we were initially supposed to get. Of course, Robbie Lawler had to draw out because of his injury, which stinks. I really wanted to see Robbie Lawler against Santiago P. Both guys kind of on this, make it or break it redemption story. And Santiago with the injuries, Lawler, coming off a win against, I want to say a former self of Nick Diaz, former shell of himself. That's what I was looking for. But yeah, nonetheless, this fight, man, surprised the hell out of me. How surprised were you by Morono's performance taking this fight on 10 days, dude?
That's the big part. I think Alex Morono has this great, and they really punctuated it during the broadcast. He's very unassuming, like, especially coming in on 10 days notice, a little bit of fat around the belly. His hands are kind of low. His chin is kind of up. I mean, we saw how that sort of went to the detriment of Paddy Pimblett, but the dude's so fast, and he makes really good, quick decisions. Like, he went for a spinning back fist, missed. Santiago goes for the spinning back fist immediately after, and Morono manages to catch him. Like the wherewithal and the speed at which you have to process, spinning back fist to anchor to his spinning back fist to catching him midway through the shot. Like, that's really, really good stuff. I was so impressed with Morono. And when you looked at his resume ahead of time, it's like there was cause to believe that this guy has a future ahead of him. I don't know if he's going to win a title, but I could definitely see a ranking next to his name very soon.
For sure.
The fact that he went in there on 10 days notice, fought a guy who prior to this really bad, almost fatal staph infection he dealt with in Ponzinibbio, we were talking about a future title challenger at the time. And while we quite haven't seen that, split decision against Jeff Neal, split decision against someone else who's who did he have a split decision with against before Jeff Neal? Was it Vicente Luque or something?
Yeah.
Somebody, but yeah, and it was very close. So like Santiago Ponzinibbio is that guy who really had a good future ahead of him, really suffered as a consequence of his poor health and time off. And while he's not the guy, he hasn't shown to be the guy who knocked out Neil Magny.
Right.
He's still really good, and he's just about on the cusp of what he was. So for Morono to go in there and deliver that kind of performance on such short notice at catchweight, really remarkable. To Ponz's credit and his corner, man, some fighters, when you tell them they're losing a fight, they can't seem to pull the trigger. Santiago went for it. He stepped through the fire. He got caught and still managed to get the knockout. So I'm glad Dana White went in there and gave both their guys the props and gave Morono his win money. There was no loser in that fight. I don't think Morono is going to take a step back after this one.
No, and I think us, the fans, won for sure. I mean, when I saw the matchup against Robbie Lawler, I thought, man, like it's going to be another tough outing for Robbie. Like, I didn't realistically love the matchup. I liked it because of the name factor. I just didn't love the matchup. And then I was like, man, I watched Morono, and I agree with you, man. His precision and his punching is insane. How accurate he was, I was like, wowzers, man. Like Santiago at points was pushing the pace, and Morono was just like, nah, dude, we're gonna flip this narrative. I don't like this, so I'm gonna come at you for a little bit here. And like you said, in that third round, Morono rocked him, like hit him flush, and I was like, like Santiago's in trouble here. I think I was like every other fan, I'm like, oh, it's the end. Like he's found that because the first two rounds, Morono was doing a fine job of picking apart everything Santiago had. And then, like you said, you listen to his coaches in that corner, man. And if you're any fighter that's watching this or aspiring to be, this is why you listen to your coaches always, because his advice was like, yo, you are done. You are losing this fight. What the hell do you have left? Let's go. You know you need this win. Let's go. You want your career? Let's go. And like Santiago just flipped that like that. And some fighters, like you said, some fighters you watch, man, their coaches are doing the same thing, and they are tuned out. Like they know they're losing the fight. What do I have left, coach? Like I'm gassed. There's nothing left in my tank. I'm toast. But I agree with you fully. I think the only thing that's going to happen are both these guys are going to continue to climb. I agree with you. Probably by the end of 2023, Morono has a nice little number by him. I don't know where it's going to rank. I'm going to say he's going to be a top 10 fighter for sure after what I saw. I wouldn't be surprised to see that by the end of 2023, and I think you would agree.
And honestly, I would be totally open to a rematch. I don't know if you have interest in that, but I think it was such a competitive fight, and the fact that Morono came in there on short notice, if you're not going to match him up with someone who's just on the precipice of being a number 15 guy, like someone that 20 to 25 range, maybe they owe him one. Maybe Pons owes him another crack because Pons is losing that fight and has something to prove.
Yeah, if I'm Morono's and I'm his coaches in his camp, I'd be like, hey, yo, give us 8 weeks. Like, give us some time to maybe prepare for this. Let's get our fighter in shape. I felt so bad because Morono, like you said, had a little bit of the pouch underneath or over the shorts, and I was like, oh, this poor guy.
Hey, I got it too right here.
Maybe all the time, 240 a love. That's what I like to say. But nonetheless, the next fight we'll get into was Darren Till taking on Mr. Duplessis, and this was a crazy fight. And I mean, I am a Darren Till guy, and I am not afraid to admit that, and I will not deny it. But I think old Mother Time is catching up to this boy. Father Time, I should say, is catching up to Darren Till. The crazy thing is, he's 29 years old. He loses this fight. I think
I
he got
could have sworn if you told me it was like 30 on the verge of 34, I would have believed it.
right. 29 years old, has been out of action for a year already going into this fight. He's had a multiple variants of injuries during camps. It just never seemed like Hill in 2021 or 2022 could kind of get it figured out. And now we're watching him take on, not an unranked opponent, but somebody that Darren Till in his prime should beat. And Darren Till suffers yet another loss, going 1-5 in his last 6 fights, which is incredible. The caliber of fighter he's faced, though, has been insane. They're great fighters. This fight started off weird. 60 straight punches.
0 to 0.
2-0. Duplessis is just feeding him on the cage. And it's so weird to see a fighter have to literally look over to the official and be like, try to talk to him, be like, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm still here. Normally that fight gets stopped. Was Darren Till saved by his graces of literally talking to him?
Probably, but I honestly feel like the referee, I think it might have been referee Mark Smith, he was a little, what's the word I'm looking for, overbearing in that position. Like when I was looking at it, a lot of the punches were actually hitting the glove. Hi, fiance, how are you?
Hello, fiance.
No, all good, all good. A lot of the punches were hitting the glove, and often it was when Darren Till was turning to address referee Mark Smith that he'd then get hit clean by Dricus. And this happened like 3 times. And so, like, at some point, dude, just let the guy fight or stop it if you really need to. I know Darren couldn't really get out of that position because he had his arm trapped. So I understand why the referee would consider stopping it. Here's the thing. I wouldn't have been mad about a stoppage, but like just either let the guys work or don't, because I think Mark was actually causing Darren Till a lot of grief because he was getting it so much harder every time he had to stop and address the referee. You asked once, Darren responded that he was fine. Like, just let the guys go.
It's like, honestly, like he got sucker punched 3 times because he was just like, bang, bang. And I'm like, oh my God, he's getting killed every time he's asking. And I mean, that's the heart of a champion or a guy who used to be in a title contention, Darren Till, for getting marked 60 times and just being like, I'm not done. Like, I'm okay. Like, I'm going to be okay. And I mean, he did look really good in that second round. He started to open up. He had that wide stance of Darren Till of former yesterday, where he would start picking guys apart and throwing those bombs and landing with precision. Mm-hmm. And then he got taken down at the end of the second round. And immediately the commentators did a phenomenal job of saying he's wincing in a ton of pain. And it looked like a normal shoot. Like it was a normal shoot. It didn't look like anything crazy. It was just Duplessis was getting worked. He took him down, grabbed him by the hips, pushed him down. And the second he went down, Till went down awkwardly. Well, that was an ACL rupture. Now, for people that didn't notice, he did at the end of the fight go up to Bruce Buffer and strictly say to Bruce, like, I don't want anybody to know, but I'm letting you know I tore my ACL. Crazy move or no?
I mean, why are you? Maybe he has a friendship with Bruce that I'm unfamiliar with. If you don't want people to know, why are you telling Bruce Buffer? I mean, what's Bruce going to do with that? I mean, he can't even do it. He's not going to be like, yeah, you're a winner. Like, yeah, ACL rupture. Yeah, I noticed. I had a moment. There was something about the scramble when they landed where I saw Till's leg get extended. And it's like anytime I've been injured in jiu-jitsu, it's been something really weird. Like oftentimes, it's not that people are like kimuraing each other's shoulder into a spiral fracture. It's just something gets caught weird, a leg gets caught in a gi, someone lands awkwardly on a takedown. And, Dricus, it wasn't a super technical takedown. Like he kind of bulldozed Darren over a little bit. And so you got to think about all that body weight, and Dricus is like a beefed up dude landing. Yeah, and this happened to me against a much smaller guy where someone sort of shot on me really hard, and their knee and my knee intersected, and it chipped the bone off my knee. It nearly tore the ACL. It nearly tore the MCL. It's like I can only imagine if Dricus is doing that, because you can only, like Darren Till might be bigger than me, but his knees aren't going to be much more sturdy than mine, right? So that's a bummer. The thing that, they asked Dana White at the press conference, like, how much has Darren Till's stock gone down? And I'm like, and he said, not at all. Shout out to Ben the Bane Davis on Twitter, who put out a really interesting statistic. Since Tyron Woodley and Darren Till have fought, they've gone a combined 1-10. Dude, Darren has these flashes, right? Right?
Yeah.
Like, Darren has these flashes against like Robert Whitaker where he looks really competitive. But ever since his rise up, where he, dusted off Donald Cerrone, which is basically his best win to date,
Is
right? It's been loss after loss after loss. He had that one split decision against Kelvin Gastelum. Now, the reason that gave people a lot of hope is because Kelvin was just coming off of that 5-round war with Israel Adesanya for the interim middleweight title. But look at who Kelvin has been since that war. That win doesn't look great now. And
Yeah.
I hate to say that because Aaron's a really cool guy. But the numbers just speak. Like, the guy can't get a W in here. I think it's time to just, if he wants to keep fighting, just match him up against fun guys. Like, Drickus did a good job of sort of absorbing some of that name power. I don't know how much more you're going to get out of Darren Till in the top 15. Like, just book him some fun fights. And if he can string together a number of wins, maybe we can look at another ranked opponent. But he's not showing to be of that ilk right now, as much as I hate to say that.
No, and I mean, again, like we said, you would think that the guy was 37 years old just by the way how many injuries he's had, how his body's deteriorated. I thought his wrestling would have been a lot more superb, especially now that he's best friends with Kamzat. I thought that would be like something be like he would shoot for, and it was just the complete opposite. I don't know. The thing with Darren Till is when he's on, he's one of the most interesting fighters in the world because he's so unpredictable. And when he's off, he's low-key calm. You can tell that he's kind of like, even during like, the whole intro thing, he used to get really hype. And at this one, he was just like, yeah, I guess we're fighting. And he had this weird haircut. I'm not going to get into it. It looked like a leader of some sort of group. But nonetheless, I'm going to give Darren Till, like, I agree with you fully. I think really the next thing he does is take a name fight for an event's sake. I mean, it's the second fight, maybe the first fight to kick things off, or even just give him a fight night where it's just a really fun stylistic matchup where he can go out and just be himself. We're not going to see him for probably another year. So he's going to be turning 31 by the next time we see Darren Till in the octagon, which is sad.
Yeah, it is. And we're going to get into scoring with the next two fights, I'm sure. But let me say, guys, that was a 10-8 first round for Dricus du Plessis. Like,
wasn't even close.
I had people saying, like, oh, because Darren Till threw 6 punches in the last 30 seconds of the round, that it's a 10-9. I'm like, guys, here are the sort of tips that the judges are given. The 3 Ds: damage, damage, domination, duration. I think it's in that order. If you have 2 of them, you consider a 10-8. If you have all 3, it's a mandatory 10-8. He had damage. The strike differential was like 60-6. I have it right here. Yeah, 60-6. 60-6 significant strikes, 82-9 for total strikes. That plus Darren Till's eye almost completely soul shot. That is damage. 4 minutes of control time while doing that damage. So there's your duration. And it's dominant. It was so one-sided. That is a 10-8 textbook round.
Yeah, I had a lot of people reach out to me. They're like, oh, 10-9. I'm like, nope, that's a 10-8 round through and through.
Dude, the referee almost stopped it 3 times. What do you want?
The fight almost got finished in the first 3 minutes. So, that'll say all I have to say about that. But I mean, I really do hope for Dricus. I do agree with you. I think I like his skills. He's sharp. He's smart. He's a very precise fighter. He knew when to take those takedowns at the right times. And his body, he's just so big, dude. At that middle, he was like laying on Darren Till, who I think is a big guy in that division. He was just gassed him the entire time. So I like to see what's next.
Me too. There is sorry, just in closing, I didn't mean to cut you off there. No. The fact that Darren Till probably took that second round and was just giving me a little bit of cause for concern. Like, Dricus has a lot going for him. Clearly powerful, clearly good fight IQ. Like, he did a really good job of lulling Darren Till into a false sense of security when he got that third takedown. Like, it really came out of nowhere and it was such an important one. Quick decision-making on that neck jaw crank.
Yeah.
Little sloppy. I don't know how to describe it. Like, there's a bit of a wildness to it that I feel like might come back to bite him against some of the more savvy, accurate strikers in this division. Like, I think like Adesanya would piece him up. But to be fair, we're not close to that yet. He still has a lot of time to grow. But there's a lot of and also the bulk, like, that's just going to make you tired. Like, I don't know how he's going to do in a 5-round fight, but great IQ, a lot of power, willing to mix it up. Be cautious of how you match make this guy a little bit longer if you can,
Yeah.
because I think it's very promising, but he does have some kinks he needs to work out.
One more guy, I think, in the top 15, that range, I think would be really good for him. But I agree with you. When you're fighting like this, man, it's not the most safe form of hand spacing I've ever seen. And that's why Till, I think, was able to capitalize that in the second round, because Till likes to throw that whopping overhand. Like that's his thing. He likes to shoot him with a quick and then throw that whopping overhand. But when your hands are like this, you're going to eat a lot of them because you're not quick enough to get there. So he does have that to work on, but I think he's got a lot of potential and a lot in the tank to be a decent fighter for sure in the UFC. Speaking of guys that are going to get pushed to the goddamn sky, Paddy Pimblett had one of the we're media people, so this is where I get to have fun with this. He has become Conor 2.0. We can't deny it. He's getting fed to us like Conor was. He's getting pushed like Conor was. Fuck It Friday was literally Paddy Pimblett eating food. I mean, we're just getting force-fed Paddy Pimblett. And I'm okay with it. I get it. The kid's electric. He's exciting. He's got a personality behind him. The people buy into him. I mean, Barstool Sports is pushing him to the goddamn moon. It's crazy what's happening with Paddy Pimblett. But do not tell me in this fight that Jared Gordon did not do enough based upon even the 3Ds that you just described to win this fight 30-27.
Okay, so I'm interested to see where this conversation goes. Upon first watch, I scored a 29-28 Paddy.
Okay.
And I know I'm in the minority there. And let me say, I said that round 2 could very much go either way. I think the sort of feverish robbery response to all this is mostly that the sort of hardcore online MMA fan base is disenfranchised with Paddy ever since that big L he took against Ariel Helwani, right? I mean, he accuses Ariel of reaching out for an interview and then not wanting to pay for the interview and being miffed. Ariel has receipts that, hey, Paddy, you reached out to me to do something and you told me to get in touch with your manager. Now, I interviewed Paddy. Not my best work. It is what it is. There's better ones if you want to take it out, but it was a weird dynamic. I think first and foremost, Thursday interviews before a fight are just always difficult. The guys are super trained. Yeah, they've already done so much media. Now they're being forced into doing more media obligations. I do think, I wouldn't say that the stuff with Ariel was like getting to him, but I don't think he was enjoying the experience. Neither here nor there. I do think that sort of alienated him a bit from the hardcores. Clearly, by the reaction in the audience, the casuals still love him. Listen, my friends who watch UFC pay-per-views, they don't know or care about the Paddy Ariel beef, right? I think sometimes we in the media, we in the sort of dedicated, we watch every single event, tune into all the interviews crowd, we sort of forget that we are an important but small part of the UFC business model, right? Most of the UFC's pay-per-view purchases come from the casual viewer, the guys who go to the bars to watch the fights, things like that. I just think they wanted Paddy to lose. I think they want to see the hype train get derailed. If you looked at the first round, that is the round to me. So I will say this. Those judges who gave round 1 to Paddy, I think, got it wrong. Not only did Jared land more in that round statistically, which they're not privy to the numbers, they're just going off what they see, but he clearly landed harder and better. He was occasionally backing up Paddy a bit. That left hook was money from start to finish. And while Paddy did sort of turn it up in the last half of the round, that was Jared's most decisive round without a doubt. Yeah. Round 2 is where I'm starting to not believe the intention behind a lot of people calling it a robbery. Paddy did better in that round.
Big time.
Statistically, he landed more than Jared. And in a fight where, the fundamental method of scoring, because I get a lot of people saying, oh, well, he took him down, he controlled him. Guys, it does not matter. The way that I just did a feature on this at CBS Sports, talked to Big John McCarthy, who was one of the people who helped create the modern scoring criteria that was adopted in 2017. If
Yeah.
you can determine who had the more impactful striking and grappling, you have your winner. You don't count aggression. You don't count control. It does not matter. Your question to who won the round is who had more impactful striking and grappling, with the immediate taking precedent over the accumulative. In my perspective, in real time, neither guy hurt the other. And I thought Paddy landed a little more often, which statistically the data backs. So in my mind, he did more accumulative damage because the impact of the damage was the same. The takedowns, Jared didn't really do much. He didn't get a submission attempt off. He didn't improve position much. Like, that didn't get him closer to finishing the fight. So by my estimation, Paddy took round 2, but it was close. Round 3, I know this is the controversial one. Jared held him up against the fence for a really long time. But again, that does not score if you can determine who did more impact. Jared did not come close to finishing the fight with a submission. He did not advance position. He just held him against the cage. And not only by the end did Paddy Pimblett land a few more strikes, what prompted me to give him the round decisively is the elbows and the knees that Paddy landed against the fence was more impactful than the little pot shots and rabbit punches that Jared Gordon did. He had, again, same like in round 2, he had more accumulative damage, and he also had more immediate damage, in my opinion. So I think it was 29-28 Paddy Pimblett on that one watch. I do not mind if you give it 29-28 Jared. I don't even mind if you give it 30-27 Jared. And I think that's part of the problem here is Jared could have won every round. Paddy, I don't think could have won every round, and I think that's sort of feeding into people's impression. But guys, however you scored it, it was competitive. And maybe there were some shenanigans, I don't know, but it was competitive. Like, don't fool yourself into thinking that Jared just stole on Paddy for 3 rounds. That's not the reality of what happened.
Yeah, and I agree with you. When I was watching the first part of it, I went, yikes, I don't know how this decision got made the way it got made. And then after reviewing it, I agree with you. There were times where I watched in the second round, I'm like, okay, the sharper, more precise fighter who's hitting more connections is usually the guy that I'm rolling with. And in that aspect, Paddy definitely won that round. So I had it 10-9, 10-9 going in. I had it split going in. And in that third round, I thought the takedown early was big. He didn't do a lot with it, but I don't know. I'm also a big wrestler, so I was like, okay, that takedown seems massive. And then he did it later on, and then he put him up against the cage for like 3 minutes. But then I watched it, and I was like, hey, Paddy's landing the bigger blows. Those not the flying knees, but the knees were hitting his head, and they were high. Like those were some massive knees that Paddy was throwing. Even the elbows, like it didn't look like much, but they were like he was throwing the 12-6 or whatever elbows, and he was connecting. I mean, there wasn't anything wrong with what Paddy was doing. He was a busier fighter in the clinch, which is definitely a thing that I agree with now. If you would have told me, and now that I've watched it, I'm going split decision. Like, I think both guys at times looked like they wanted to win it, but then did enough to like not want to win it. You know what I mean? Both very natural, preservative guys at the end of the fight. And I was like, is this like a 29-20? Like, I think it's a split decision.
That's exactly it, dude. I have no problems if people think that Jared Gordon won that fight. When I scored it in real time, I said point blank, that second round, especially in my opinion, is a toss-up. There's no robbery here. Either guy could win. But the people who are claiming and screaming that this was the fix is in, Paddy no way deserved to win that fight. Guys, you either don't understand the scoring criteria, which granted, it's so hard to wrap your brain around. I get it. Or you just want Paddy to lose.
Yeah.
And it's that word impact. You know, John McCarthy told Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell recently on Morning Combat that impact is damage, and that damage is the word that they wanted to put into the language, but apparently the commissions thought it was, too faux pas. You don't want to give the impression that fist fighting is dangerous, so you don't want to say damage, which is absurd. But yeah, who came closer to finishing the fight? Jared Gordon, in my opinion, takedowns aren't supposed to land. It's what you do with the takedowns. It's
Right.
advancing the more dominant positions because in theory, the guard is supposed to be a bit of a neutral position, right? And I think people have different opinions on that, and that's going to impact how they view the value of a takedown. I get it, but it's just the robbery stuff is just blowing my mind.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, Jared Gordon, I mean, if anything, this really just hypes him up to be even more and getting bigger names, I think, for the next foreseeable future in his fights. I
Bro.
think it's really big.
I hope so, because Dana was not happy with his third round performance.
No, he was not. But I think ultimately it was just one of those things where I think he wanted what I've gathered from Patty Bimblett and the hype train that is Patty Bimblett is I even said it to my girlfriend. She's not a huge MMA fan by any stretch of the imagination. She watched the fight with me because she was intrigued by the name Patty Bimblett. She had been seeing it everywhere. So I said to her, from my analysis and what I have seen with Patty Bimblett, he gets rocked. And he gets rocked early, but somehow he escapes it, and he's a better fighter because of getting rocked. He did it again. He got rocked earlier in the first round, and he was back to being Patty Bimblett. And I mean, that is Patty's like faux pas so far in the UFC.
Don't tell Patty that he was not happy when I suggested that Luigi Vendramini hurt him early in round one. Which I mean, don't tell him. His exact words are something to the effect of, "And what the hell do you know about MMA?" I mean, I do not proclaim to know as much as Patty Pimblett or anyone else who fights, but I think I've consumed and written and talked to fighters enough and officials to at least have a sense of what's going on. It's not by any means perfect. It's always a work in progress, but Patty didn't get rocked. That's what I like.
Okay, fair. Okay, so in that first round, Patty did not get rocked. He wasn't a little confused. It's all good. No.
No. That was fight of the night, right?
Oh, not a big deal. But yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Patty Bimblett, like I said earlier, is a marketable guy. He's being pushed to literally the moon, man. He's 27 years old. The future is very, very bright for him. There's a lot of matchups to make, I think, with this kid. It sounds by like the press conference, Ilya Tapora wants this kid and wants him bad.
They're not going to do it.
Everything in your power to avoid that fight. Your management team better be best of best, because you want to take, I think Patty takes on another guy not ranked at the moment. I think that's probably his smartest fight, or a guy in that 10 to 15 caliber. I don't think you take on a top 10 opponent quite yet. And again, that was like the Connor thing, right? When he fought Dennis Seaver, that's when he exploded, right? And he fought Dustin Poirier, and then of course we all know what happened after that. But who the hell do you give Patty Bimblett? Because I think
I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't have every name at lightweight off the top of my head. I'm looking at the ranked guys. Okay. I haven't really processed this. I'm kind of going through this in real time. But does Patty Pimblett beat Tony Ferguson?
Hell no, dude. And that's crazy because Ferguson hasn't won in 4 years.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I don't think he's got a chance again. I didn't mention this. I was going to say, I know it's out there, but if the UFC wants to hit the panic button, if they saw that Jared Gordon fight and they're like, you know what, we sort of, because this is what they did with Conor McGregor, and they're doing it with Patty Pimblett too, right? Guys, I'm not saying he's going to be Conor. Just hear me out.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying getting that treatment.
When the UFC realized what they had in Conor McGregor as a personality and potential, they didn't give him. They were mindful in their matchmaking for as long as they could to give him incrementally more difficult challenges, but fights that would accentuate his strengths and allow him time to shore up his defenses. For a long time, people were calling for Conor versus Frankie Edgar. We never saw that fight happen. Instead, we saw Conor get matched up with strikers, Dustin Poirier, Dennis Seaver, all the way to the Jose Aldo fight, with the exception that Jose fell out the first time they were matched. Chad Mendes was brought in on short notice, and Chad Mendes, looky, dominated that first round with his wrestling, ended up getting kind of gassed, as well as the body shots from Conor McGregor started taking an effect. They did the same thing with Patty, right? Incrementally more difficult challenges. Let's see, with enough time, if this guy can shore up a lot of the gaps and make a run at something big. The difference is, Patty's a lot farther in his career than Conor McGregor was at that point. Like, he's had a lot of fights at this point, and I'm worried we're starting to see sort of the upper limits of what Patty Pimblett's going to be. if the UFC is ready to hit the panic button after that Jared Gordon fight, I know it's a little out there. Conor McGregor is going to need an opponent.
And Patty asked for it. Patty also said during media week, he said, honestly, boys, like, don't tell me that wouldn't be the biggest selling pay-per-view of all time.
It's going to sell so many pay-per-views, and if you think you're about to lose the Paddy Pimblett hype because he's going to lose his next fight, because he barely, if at all, got past Jared Gordon, just pull the trigger. Conor McGregor has just been losing the top-level guys. He needs a tune. For the love of God, just give Conor a tune-up fight. Like, dude, I get that you think you're the best, but you haven't fought frequently. You've been injured. Like, it's a lot to ask to keep coming back in there and fighting Dustin Poirier. And Mike Chandler, while you definitely can beat the guy, it's not going to be fun. You're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
Conor versus Paddy. I don't think Paddy's got a ton for Conor. And if he does, great. Now you can really milk Paddy Pimblett. But I think it's time to hedge out on Paddy soon.
Yeah.
I say Conor McGregor. Let's just do it.
Yeah, see, and I like I really like the RDA call out of Conor McGregor finally wanting that fight. I loved that call out. It's like 7 years wait, right? But it was awesome to hear RDA say that, because Rafael's on his way out too. Like, it's not like his best days are ahead of him. He's definitely on his way out. So to get that money fight finally 7 years later, where it was supposed to happen at both of their peaks, would be insane. But he had that.
Like, RDA is such a nice, soft-spoken guy, and then he drops the, starts cycling off that shit you're online, and I'm like, yeah, RDA, you go for it, dude.
Talking about USADA and putting me in the pool, and I'm like, whoa, RDA, let's go. So obviously he knew what his call out was the second he won it. So I would love to see that matchup, but I do agree with you. I think for Conor's sake, he beats Paddy Pimblett, and that's the fight that he needs to take as a Paddy Pimblett name, where he fights that guy. Maybe he fights RDA after that. Who says no, right? I mean, everybody's going to say yes to that. And I really like the matchup of Conor and Paddy. I think they're just both guys that could benefit both this fight. But yeah, and so we'll get into the next fight. I mean, there's lots to talk about Pimblett and Conor McGregor. We go on for days, but we had a main event that took place, and that was Jan Blachowicz taking on Magomedov and Ankalaev. And for all intents and purposes, damn, it just missed the mark. When I saw this fight, I was like, yes, someone's gonna get knocked the frig out. Like, I just had this Jan and his Polish power, and Magomed being this indestructible force in the UFC so far. I was just like, all right, man, somebody's gonna get put to sleep quickly. And it just ended up being a feel-out process for like literally 5 rounds. What I got out of it. What did you take from the fight?
My biggest takeaway is, what on God's earth is Jan Blachowicz' legs made out of? Because that dude, first, the Alexander Rakic fight, right? Alexander ends up getting tearing something in his knee and being out of that fight, right? And dude, Jan had Magomed Ankalaev limping on both sides. Like, he had to switch from southpaw to orthodox to give his lead leg a break, and then he was limping on the other one. Like, I don't know why Blachowicz had so little resistance on those late takedowns, but those second and third rounds, I was like, dude, this is unreal that he can do this to guys.
Big time. Yeah, I agree with you. Ankalaev's bruising was insane on his lead leg, and then he switched and got kicked so hard that he took a step back and he started grimacing, and I was like, oh my God, dude. Jan's got Polish power in them legs.
Everywhere.
And like you're watching the last time we saw Jan, I mean, explosive as hell against Rakic, and Rakic was like, I don't know what happened to his whole leg, just shattered. It was just weird what happened in that fight. And then the fight before that, he takes on Izzy, puts him to the ground, and he's just like, I'm gonna pound you, literally, kid, for 5 rounds. Like, hope you're ready for this. Like, and then I see this Magomed matchup, and I think that's why I was intrigued, because Magomed, it's been the year of the Dagestani fighter, and I was just like, okay, if anything, this is a trifecta. He's going to be the champion. I'm getting ready for this in my head. And Magomedov didn't do anything really in those first. I mean, the first round he looked okay. He was sharp when he had to pick his spots, but in the second and third, I was like, oh boy, he's getting picked apart on the legs here. This ain't pretty. And then he started shooting, and Jan had no answer. And it was just like, Ankalaev should have done that in round 3 when those legs were getting torqued. And I think we have a champion.
For sure. I know that people were sort of upset with the scorecards. I think in real time, I scored it 3 rounds to 2 for Ankalaev. but the sort of clauses there were that one was a toss-up. If you wanted to give it to Blachowicz, you're getting no complaints from me. And I do think a 10-8, while maybe not absolute, was in play in that fifth round. If we go back to the 3Ds, damage, domination, duration, he had a long duration of domination. And in terms of impactful strikes, not only was there an enormous gap, I'd say the round 5 strikes were a lot more damaging than the round 4 strikes in totality. So if you're going to give round 4 a 10-9, I think by contrast, a 10-8 is in play for round 5. And so if you were one of the people, like I said, round 1's a toss-up. If you go to Blachowicz on round 1 and you give Ankalaev the 10-8 in round 5, 2 and 3 to Blachowicz, 4 to Ankalaev, there's your draw. So I'm not mad at the outcome. I just think the aftermath of all of this has been absolutely hilarious.
Oh, dude. And again, I've been in media for a very long time. You have been in media for a long time. Dude, as soon as Joe Rogan started asking these weird random questions to Jan, it was almost like he was like trying to tell Jan, yeah, congratulations, you lost, but being subtle about it. And Jan is such a... Can I give Jan, Jan Blachowicz, if you ever watch me, I just want to say I'm the biggest fan of you because you're a constant professional through and through, because he was asking questions that were just so ridiculous, like Jan lost the fight. No, it was a split decision. He did his part to get the split. And I'm like, you are talking like he doesn't deserve to be in this octagon right now.
He did roast Ankalaev a bit the next day, too. Let me pull up the tweet. I don't know if you've seen it. It was getting shared around in my Slack. But, essentially, if someone missed the post-fight speech, Blachowicz said, give Ankalaev the title. Obviously, I can't review it in real time, but I don't feel like, at the very least, I don't feel like I've won the fight. Right. Ankalaev goes, yeah, totally right. He didn't win that fight. I did. Give me my belt. So Jan Blachowicz went on Twitter today and he wrote, let me reiterate something. First, I honestly don't think the fight was terrible at all. That's in response to Dana White saying that he zoned out and that it sucked. Second, I don't feel I've won, but neither that I lost. A draw was fair. It was. This is the best part. End result. One dude cried and talked about his supposed injuries. Another dude showed that honor can be and still is upheld in this game. I'm glad the fans see it and appreciate it for what it is. Yeah, Jan Blachowicz, you say that, man. You deserve that.
Oh, man. And then Ankalaev in his camp at the end of the fight were like, we don't know if we're going to come back to the UFC. I was like, dude, that's so piss poor. Like, I get it was a fight. That's such a crybaby analysis. And I feel like so many guys do that, and it upsets me. It's like, okay, you put the one thing we have been told since the early 2000s is never leave a fight in the hands of the judges. You want to go out and finish it, you go out and finish it. That's what champions do, right? And so anyways, that's the situation that I kind of got in that. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty crazy. But anyways, you got some breaking news. I just want to quickly get into this. You got a text right quick. And it's funny that we go from that title fight that doesn't crown a champion to one that will in the light heavyweight division. Yeah. Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira for the light heavyweight championship in January. Hill got the call literally after the results were being announced at the last fight at UFC 282's headlining fight. Dude, Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira, who do you got?
God, I don't. You know what? I like both guys. Obviously, in some ways, this is sort of a repeat of the Glover-Yuri thing in terms of their individual strengths. This is what I want. So I'm going to try and will this into existence just because I love the chaos. In the last 18 days, 17 days technically from when Yuri announced he was vacating the title to UFC 282. In those 17 days, we went from Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira to Yuri injuring his shoulder and vacating the title, to Glover getting removed from the card entirely, to Blachowicz and Ankalaev getting elevated to the main event for the vacant title, to a split draw, to Jamal Hill and Glover Teixeira fighting for the title in a new main event of a pay-per-view just 1 month later, and Anthony Smith getting left out in the dust because he was supposed to fight Hill in March. I love chaos, so this is what I'm going to predict. Glover Teixeira wins that fight and immediately retires. And then we got another vacant title. That's what I want to see.
The light heavyweight division, I said this to James Lynch, who's another good friend of the podcast, but I said to him,
Shout out to James.
It's such a weird concept to think like the light heavyweight division is literally in shambles like the bantamweight division was 5 years ago, where you really don't know what's going to happen, and it's in such cluster and chaos. But I agree with you. I think Glover wins. I think he finishes Jamal somehow. Jamal's good on the ground too, so it'll be interesting to see. But Glover gets that finish, says, you know what? Yeah, retires. Yuri comes back, and then we'll probably get Yuri and Jamal Hill at some point. I think that's probably the matchup.
Yeah, and it's crazy how these things happen. As you mentioned, I did talk to Jamal Hill earlier today, and he was saying that before Ankalaev even left the cage, I had gotten that call, and I feel like good things don't always come to fighters and what they want. They have very little leverage in terms of getting the fights they want booked. But Glover, what happened was the UFC, I guess, had kind of settled on Magomed Ankalaev versus Glover Teixeira when Prochazka fell out. And Glover said, I am not fighting Ankalaev on such short notice. If you move it to 283 in Brazil and give me some time to prepare, I'll do it. UFC says, no, we want to keep the fight. But what Jamal told me is, and maybe this was out there before I had heard of it, is that while they were negotiating with Glover, UFC called Jamal Hill for 282 and said, hey, we don't know who yet. They didn't even tell him that Yuri was injured. They said, would you be willing to fight either Blachowicz or Ankalaev in the co-main of 282 for a number one contender spot? And Jamal Hill says, sorry, guys, I'm recovering from an injury. I'm not going to fight those guys in such short notice. Plus, in his mind, he's like, especially now knowing that Yuri is out, he's like, if I beat Anthony Smith, I'm probably in the title conversation anyway, and that makes a lot more sense than going up against Ankalaev on a few weeks' notice, right? So it's funny because both Glover and Jamal were off fights at 282, both turned it down, and yet here we are just a few weeks later, and they're getting the fight for the vacant light heavyweight title in the main event in Brazil.
And my heart goes out to Anthony Smith. You could see how lifeless he seemed to be when they had made that announcement. But yeah. I know Anthony Smith, that boy's a competitor, and he'll come back fierce as ever. Man, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, dude. How can people find you on social media?
Yeah, man. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Candidly, this was my day off, so I don't love doing this sort of stuff for my day off, but it's been a joy. It made my day, so thank you so much for having me. Best place to find me, my Instagram and stuff I'm not too active on, so Twitter's the best place at Shak_Fu. That's SHAK_FU. The YouTube channel, SHAK MMA, that's where you're going to find all the interviews. Just dropped one today with Jamal Hill that you can check out. If you want to go see the Patty Pimblett one for yourself and leave me a comment, let me know, make sense of it for me. I would love that. We might have some other cool ones dropping this week, TBD. So yeah, man, that's everything I could ask for and more.
Man, your interview too, and people don't know this, but you interviewed Bobby Lashley. I thought was one of the best ones too. Bobby Lashley is one of the I'm a WWE guy too, one of the best in the business. Just such a
go check out Shaq Wrestling. All the good interviews there too. Really good one with Sheamus recently too. That guy has such an interesting story to tell. If you want to hear about Malachi Black growing up in a cult-like family, it's there for you.
Makes a ton of sense. If you watch his character, makes a ton of sense. But anyways, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you can find us, of course, at the Boomtown Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can follow us at bluecollarmg.com. All of our stuff is on Blue Collar Media Group Radio. And of course, like I said, thank you to our sponsors. Again, if not for them, we can't do this. So thank you so much. You guys have a fantastic evening. Shaq, once again, thanks for joining us, man.
Peace.